In this video, we are going to look at finding the equation of a line. There's a couple different ways that we can write a linear equation. We have standard form, which is ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are real numbers. That means whole numbers, and a is positive. So in order for an equation to be in true standard form, we need a, b, and c to be whole numbers, and we need a to be positive. So let's first just look at how to take an equation and write it in standard form. So for example, if we have y equals 2x minus 5, and I want to put this in standard form, that means I first need my 2x to be on the other side of that equal sign. And in order to do that, I need to get rid of it on the right-hand side. So it's a positive 2x, so I'm going to subtract 2x from each side. And I get minus 2x plus y equals negative 5. So now I have my x and my y and my number in the right spot, but there's still something wrong. It's not in true standard form yet. Remember our two conditions. The first is their whole numbers. So we have a negative 2, a 1, and a negative 5. So they're whole numbers, that's fine. But we also need that first number, the negative 2, to be positive. In order for it to be positive, I'm going to multiply my whole equation by a negative 1. You can't just multiply the 2 by negative 1. You have to multiply everything by negative 1. So this becomes 2x minus y equals 5. And now it's in true standard form. Okay, let's look at our second one here. The first thing I'm going to do is expand this bracket. Now remember that 2 is going to apply to the x, giving me 2x. But it also applies to my negative 1, giving me a negative 2. Now I can bring my negative 2 over to the other side. So I'm going to add 2 to each side. And then I'm going to bring my y over to the other side by subtracting y from both sides. And so I get 2x minus y equals negative 2. And again, this is in true standard form because we have whole numbers and our first number is positive. Now, what would we have done if this first number worked out to be a fraction, something like 2 over 3x minus y equals negative 2? So we looked at how to get rid of a negative, but how do we get rid of a fraction? Well, in order to make this number whole, I'm going to have to multiply by 3. But again, we cannot just multiply the x by 3. I'm multiplying the whole thing, my whole equation, by 3. So this becomes 2x minus 3y equals negative 6. Okay, so again, just to wrap up, standard form, all of your numbers are whole numbers and your first number is positive. If you end up with a number that's negative, you're going to multiply the whole thing by negative 1. And if you end up with a fraction, you're going to multiply by that bottom number in order to get rid of the fraction. Or if there's more than one fraction, a common denominator or the lowest common multiple of those numbers to get rid of both of the fractions. Okay, so let's look at point-slope form in order to actually find the equation or write an equation to represent a line. Now, with these types of equations, there's lots of variations in these equations, but the key thing to remember when you're writing the equation of a line, you need two pieces of information. You need a slope, and you need a point. Those are the two pieces of information you're needing, regardless of what the question looks like or the variation in the question. We're always looking for these two things. And where the question gets more tricky is sometimes they make you do a little bit more detective work in order to find the slope. Sometimes they give you the slope, sometimes they give you a bit of information on how to find the slope. They don't give it to you directly. But if you can remember, your overall goal here is to find the slope and a point. And if you can find both of these things, then you can use point-slope form in order to find that equation. So point-slope form looks like this: m bracket x minus x1 bracket equals y minus y1. And what we're trying to do is fill in the slope and then a point, x1 and y1. The other x and y stay there because we want x and y in our equation. And you'll notice that looks awfully like our question number 2 up here. Once we have it in that form, we can rearrange to put it in standard form if that's what the question is asking. Okay, so let's look at an example. Again, we're remembering we're trying to find a point and a slope. If we can do that, we can solve for our linear equation. So question 1, find the equation of a line. So as soon as I see that, find the equation of a line, I'm going to write down slope and point, because those are the two things I know I'm looking for. Find the equation of a line through the point 3, 4, so there's my point, with a slope of 5. And it wants us to write our final answer in standard form. So they were super nice to us in this question. They didn't give us any detective work. They just told us the point and the slope. So let's use point-slope form in order to find the equation of a line, and then we can rewrite it into standard form. So again, remember my point-slope form looks like this. And I'm going to put in the information that I know. So I know my slope is 5. And my point is 3, 4. So I've put in my information into point-slope form, and now we're going to rearrange this equation to put it into standard form. So I'm going to expand my bracket, so I get 5x. Remember, the 5 also applies to the negative 3, so I get negative 15 equals y minus 4. And so now I can add 15 to both sides in order to get rid of the number on my left-hand side. And I get 5x equals y plus 11 minus 4 plus 15. And then I'm going to subtract y in order to get it back over to this side. And I just double check, do I have whole numbers? Yes. Is my first one positive? Yes. So my final answer is 5x minus y equals 11. Let's look at another one. Find the equation of a line. Okay, so I'm looking for slope and a point. Find the equation of a line that goes through the points 1, 2, and negative 3, 6. And write your final answer in standard form. Now in this one, they've given us 2 points, but they haven't told us our slope. So that means we're going to need to use those 2 points in order to find the slope of this line. So I'm going to pick one of those points to be the point that I'm using, 1, 2. And then I need to use those 2 points to find slope. And we have a formula for slope that says our slope, or the steepness of a line, is determined by the change in y, or y2 minus y1, divided by the change in x, or x2 minus x1. And so what I can do is subtract the y's. So I'm going to do 6 minus 2 over negative 3 minus 1. Now be very consistent here. If I say this is my point 1 and this is my point 2, then that means my negative 3 is x2 and my 6 is y2. My 1 is x1 and my 2 is y1. So make sure that you're not doing 6 minus 2 and then doing 1 take away negative 3. You have to make sure you're consistent with which point you put first. So 6 minus 2 and negative 3 minus 1, we get 4 over negative 4, which just equals negative 1. So I now know my slope and my point, And I can use point slope form to find the equation of my line. I'm going to put in my information, -1, x minus 1, y minus 2, and then I can expand and solve into standard form like the question's asking. So I get minus x plus 1, be careful of your negatives there, y minus 2. I'm then going to subtract 1 from both sides to get rid of my plus 1 on the left-hand side. So get minus x equals y minus 3. And then I'm going to subtract y from both sides. Get minus x minus y equals -3. And I just got to check my standard form. They're whole numbers, but I have a positive x there, so I'm going to multiply the whole thing by -1 to get x plus y equals 3 as my final equation in standard form. Okay, so again, when I'm looking for the equation of a line, I know I want to find the slope in a point. And in this case, they didn't tell me my slope. They gave me some information about it, so I had to do a bit of detective work in that I'm going to use my slope formula in order to find the slope of a line that goes through those 2 points using my slope formula. And then I'm going to put that into point slope form and rearrange to get standard form. So once I have my slope and I have a point, the rest is the same, right? We put it into our point slope formula and rearrange for standard form. The change is that I needed to do a bit more detective work to figure out what my slope is. So here's another one. I want you to pause the video, try this one out, and then start it up again when you're ready. Okay, so let's go through. Find the equation of a line. I'm going to write down slope and point. And it goes through the points 1, 5, and 3, 8. So I'm going to write down one of the points. It doesn't matter which one you use. In the end, you'll get the same answer. So I'm going to choose 1, 5, and it wants our final answer in standard form. So again, they haven't told me my slope, so I have to do a bit of detective work, and I'm going to use my slope formula. In order to find the slope of a line that goes through those points. I'm going to use this is my point 1, and this is my point 2. So I'm going to do 8 minus 5 over 3 minus 1, and I get 3 over 2. So my slope is 3 over 2. Now that I know those two bits of information, I'm going to put that into my point slope formula. So I get 3 over 2, x minus 1, y minus 5. I'm going to expand my bracket. Remember, the 3 over 2 applies both to the x and the -1. I'm going to add 3 over 2 to both sides in order to get rid of my 3 over 2 on the left-hand side. And then I'm going to subtract y. But I'm not quite done because I don't have whole numbers. So in order to get rid of a fraction over 2, I'm going to multiply this whole thing by 2. So I get 3x minus 2y equals -7. And now I have all whole numbers, and my first number is positive. So that is my final answer in standard form. Okay, let's look at another way to solve these questions using a different form. So the other form we can use is called slope-intercept form. And this is where we have the equation y equals mx plus b, where the m is our slope and the b is our y-intercept. So with these equations, I'm still looking for slope and a point. However, if instead of a point, they tell me the y-intercept, or b, then that makes my life even easier. So you need two pieces of information. You either need slope and a point, or slope and a y-intercept. Either of those will help you get to the answer. Slope and y-intercept will be a lot easier, but if they don't tell you the y-intercept, then you can use a point to get to the answer as well. So let's look at rearranging an equation to put it into slope-intercept form, and then pulling out the slope and intercept from that. So find the slope and y-intercept of the line 6x plus 2y minus 4 equals 0. So in slope-intercept form, we want it to be y equals and everything else to the other side. So that means I want to get my 6x and my minus 4 over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract by a 6x. Again, you have to do it to both sides. So we get 2y minus 4 equals minus 6x. And then I'm going to add 4 to get my 4 over to the other side, or to get rid of it on the left-hand side. And finally, my y is not quite by itself yet. I need to divide by 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2, so I get minus 3x plus 2. Make sure we're dividing everything on that side by 2. Now that I have it in slope-intercept form, I can pull out my slope and y-intercept. So in this method, we don't need our x to be positive. We just need it to be a y equals, and then something times x plus or minus something. So this one, again, our slope is represented here, and our y-intercept is here. So that means our slope is -3, and our y-intercept is 2. Or we could say 0, 2, if we want to give it as a point. So let's look at writing an equation based off some pieces of information. So find the equation of a line. Again, we're looking now for slope and a point, or slope and y-intercept would be even easier. And this one tells us we have a slope of -2 and a y-intercept of 3. And it wants our final answer in slope-intercept form. Once we have those two pieces of information, there's no real calculations we need to do here. They've given us the information we need. So we can just write it in the form y equals mx plus b. And in this case, we know our m is -2 and our b is 3. And so our equation in slope-intercept form is just y equals -2x plus 3. Sometimes, again, they make us do a little bit more detective work and they don't give us that information off the bat. So let's see how to solve those. So find the equation of a line that passes through the point -4, 1 with a slope of -0.5. And it wants our final answer in slope-intercept form. So they haven't given us a y-intercept, but they did give us a slope. So I know my equation is going to be y equals -0.5 x plus or minus something, but I don't know what that something is yet. However, they have given us a point, and I can use that point to find the y-intercept. And so I'm going to substitute the point into my equation and then solve for b. So the point they gave me was -4, 1. So I'm going to put 1 in where y is, and -4 where x is, And now I can solve for b and then rewrite my final equation. So I get 1 equals 2 plus b. So negative times a negative is positive, and 4 times a half is 2. And then I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get negative 1 equals b. So now I know my slope, I know my y-intercept, and so therefore my equation is y equals negative half x minus 1. So you can see they don't give us our intercept. We can easily find it using a point. So here's another one very similar to question 3. I want you to pause the video, try this one out, and then start it up again when you're ready. Okay, so we're finding the equation of a line. It passes through the point 2, negative 3. And they gave us a slope of 5 over 2. So they didn't give us our y-intercept, but we can find it using the point they gave us. So I'm going to write my equation as much as I can. So I know it's going to be y equals 5 over 2x plus or minus something. And I'm going to plug in the point they gave us and then solve for b. So I get negative 3 equals 5 plus b. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get negative 8 equals b. So therefore, my equation is 5 over 2x minus 8. Okay, let's look at some other variations. So we've looked at them telling us the slope. We've looked at them giving us 2 points, and then we have to use that to find a slope. But there is another way they may tell us or give us information about the slope, and we have to do, again, a little bit more detective work in order to figure out what that slope is. And that is if they tell us the equation is parallel or perpendicular to another line. So just sort of a quick aside, in case we've forgotten some terminology, parallel lines look something like this. Parallel lines never cross. They never touch. And that is because their slopes are the same. You can think of them like train tracks. So parallel lines never cross. And in order for that to happen, they have to have the same amount of steepness. So their slopes are the same. So if the slope of 1 is 3, then the parallel slope, and we can use these two little lines to represent parallel, is also 3. If the slope is a half, the parallel slope is also half. So in parallel lines, when they say these lines are parallel, what they're telling you is their slopes are going to be the same. If lines are perpendicular, that means they cross at a 90-degree angle. Okay? In order for that to happen, the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. What does that mean, negative reciprocals? Well, one of them has to have a positive slope, and one of them has to have a negative slope. And their slope, the numbers or the steepness of their slope, has to be the exact opposite or reciprocals of each other. So if I have a slope that is 2/3, the perpendicular slope, and we can use that little symbol there for perpendicular, is going to be negative because the first one was positive. And the number is going to be flipped. It's going to be a reciprocal. So instead of 2 over 3, it's going to be 3 over 2. If I have a slope of negative half, the perpendicular slope is going to be positive, because the first one was negative, 2 over 1, or just 2. Let's do another one. If the slope is negative 3, then the perpendicular slope is going to be positive 1 over 3. So the number is flipped upside down and the sign is the opposite. Okay, so the other way that they might tell you information about the slope is by telling you they're parallel or perpendicular to another line. Let's look at some of those examples. So find the equation of a line that passes through the point -2, -3, and it's parallel to this line. Again, it's parallel to this line. So that is telling me that the slope will be the same as this other line. So I need to first find out, well, what is the slope of this line? To do that, I'm going to rearrange the equation into y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to get the y by itself. So I'm going to get rid of this 3x and this minus 9. So I'm going to do 6y equals minus 3x plus 9. So I've subtracted a 3x from both sides and added a 9 to both sides. So I get 6y equals minus 3x plus 9. And I'm going to divide by 6. And simplify. Okay, so the slope of this line is -1/2. So the parallel slope must also be -1/2. So that means I'm finding the equation of a line that passes through the point to -2, -3, and it has a slope of -1/2 because it's parallel to that line, or the same slope as that line. And now that I have those two bits of information, the rest of the question is the same. So it wants it in slope-intercept form, so I'm going to use the slope-intercept formula. I know my equation is going to be -1/2x plus or minus something because it's parallel to that other line. I'm going to substitute in my point and solve. And I get that b is -4. So therefore my line is -1/2x minus 4. So a bit trickier because again, they've given us a point, but instead of telling us the slope, they told us that it's parallel or the same as this other line. So we rearranged that other line to find its slope, said our slope has to be the same, and then we did the same steps we did up here in these other two equations, writing out the y equals mx plus b formula as much as we can, substituting in our point to find b, and then that tells us the rest of our line. So here's a similar question, but this time it's perpendicular to that line. So I want you to pause the video, try it out, and then start it up again when you're ready. Okay, so again, we're finding the equation of a line. So we know we're looking for these two bits of information. It tells us the point is minus 5, 2, and it's perpendicular to the equation 3x plus 6y minus 9 equals 0. So again, let's rearrange this equation to be y equals. So we get 6y equals minus 3x plus 9, and I divide by 6, and I get minus half x plus 3 over 2. So the slope of this line is negative half. The perpendicular slope, remember, has to have the opposite sign, so it's going to be positive, and then I flip the number. So my slope is 2 in order for it to be perpendicular to that line. Now that I have those 2 bits of information, the rest of the question is the same. I know my line is going to be y equals 2x plus or minus something. So I'm going to substitute in my point and solve. I'm going to add 10 to both sides. I get 12 equals b. So therefore, my equation is 2x plus 12. Okay, I want you to rate yourself on how you feel you've done with finding the equation of a line. You're going to give yourself a thumbs down if you're having some trouble and you need some help, a finger pointed if you need some more practice, and a thumbs up if you can find the equation of a line. You don't really need any more help or practice.